This has been one of the deadliest weeks for Israeli forces in Gaza in more than a year, as the IDF advances from multiple directions and Hamas digs in. I mean, at this point, there's no indication of a peace deal coming anytime soon. So let's get into what we know. Starting out with an overview map here, this was released by the IDF spokesperson, Brigadier General Defrin, earlier this week, and it gives an idea of where the 5 different IDF divisions are currently operating inside of the Gaza Strip. According to this map here, we have the Gaza Division operating in the Rafah area, the southern portion of the Strip. The 36th and 98th Divisions are pushing into Khan Yunis from the south and the east, where there's been some pretty significant fighting in recent days. The 252nd is operating in Gaza City in the Nesdrim corridor, and the 162nd is fighting Hamas in Gaza's north, another area that has seen a significant uptick in Hamas attacks and violence just in the last couple days. According to a statement from the IDF Chief of Staff, Lieutenant General Zamir, earlier this week, he said, quote, "We are in the midst of a powerful and relentless operation. Thanks to you, Hamas is losing control. We eliminated the mass murderer Mohammed Sinwar, and to all of the other murderers of October 7th, we are sending a clear message. Your day will come." Now, again, we are seeing the IDF advance from multiple directions, closing in on some of these Hamas strongholds, areas that the IDF has not operated in previously or had limited control during earlier phases of this war. And we've seen continued pushes from the IDF, evacuation orders for the Palestinian civilians to move them to smaller and smaller areas of the Strip as the IDF goes in to clear some of these additional locations. Now, that has led to a significant uptick in direct engagements between the IDF and Hamas in recent days. Prior to the last couple weeks, it was relatively standoffish. We saw the IDF push into some areas on the outskirts of the Gaza Strip, but as they move further and further in, we're seeing direct engagements not just released by the IDF, but also some footage from Hamas. We'll play some of it in today's video. And then in line with that, as you would expect, unfortunately, a rise in casualties. So on June 3rd, the IDF put out a statement that 3 soldiers were killed in an attack. They say the Hamas terrorists set out from a tunnel shaft in a building and planted the explosive devices, not dissimilar to the video being shown here. This is an active tunnel that is used for terror. The entrance to the tunnel is located inside of a destroyed building close to a route. Nearly every other building is booby-trapped and contains a tunnel entrance. We're demolishing these homes not for the sake of destroying. Every building that is destroyed poses an operational threat and could harm our forces. And I want you to keep that in mind as we get into this second significant incident this week on June 6th, where 4 Israeli soldiers were killed and 5 wounded. And this is one of the significant challenges as they continue to clear Hamas from Gaza is the booby-trapped buildings, the booby-trapped tunnels, and in turn, you're seeing more and more that the IDF is resorting to just leveling buildings rather than risking soldiers going in and clearing them out one by one. So on June 6th, 4 Israeli soldiers were killed and 5 wounded by an explosion in a building in Khan Yunis. They say, according to the IDF probe, the soldiers entered the building to clear it of possible terror infrastructure, including tunnels. The building was booby-trapped, and the explosion caused the structure to collapse on the soldiers, killing 4 and wounding 5 others, including 1 seriously. Now, we've talked about this in recent videos and shown some of the Hamas footage of the tactics they are using here, and we're seeing it more and more, where they lure in the IDF, oftentimes firing small arms in their general direction. The Israeli forces then move towards that location to try to clear it of the Hamas fighters and or identify a tunnel entrance that they can destroy. Maybe seal that piece up or even move down to interrogate that tunnel. Maybe there's hostages down there. Maybe there's Hamas fighters down there or anything else. And the general tactic that we've seen used by the IDF is they first send in a drone to these buildings. They're not caught off guard when these buildings detonate anymore. But the IED war in this conflict is just a game of cat and mouse. So what we've seen over time is that the IDF has adapted. They're no longer just rushing into buildings, and they haven't been for some time. They're first sending in drones. We'll play a clip here showing how this works in a warehouse attack that took place a couple weeks ago. You see the drone come in, search the immediate vicinity for clear signs of Hamas militants and or explosive charges. Hard to find those with a drone. So second, you send in a dog sniffing for explosive devices. The dogs have a lot of capability, but they can't get everything. And in this case, for instance, we see the camera is up high. It's not clear where the explosive charges are, but it would be hard for the dog to identify charges on, say, the second story of a building when they're still on the first story. So the dog comes in, searches the area, and then last, the soldiers come in to interrogate the facility. Now, in this video here, again, from a couple weeks ago in a warehouse facility, we're not clear of the casualties in this incident. You can see that Hamas is using a backup camera to identify when the soldiers are in the building. They then detonate the charge, collapsing the building, allegedly, on top of the Israeli soldiers there. This is a common tactic being used more and more throughout the Gaza Strip. We're seeing kind of modifications to the tactics for Hamas to keep this as a deadly option in their arsenal. But in turn, the result, and it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure this out, is if you go into a couple different buildings and they blow up, how many do you need to go into before you say, don't go into that next one? We just have to assume at this point that there are explosive charges in there, drop the thing from the outside, level it. And that's largely what we're seeing in certain areas of the Strip, especially down in Rafah, where some IDF sources have said that every single building in that area has been rigged with booby traps. Now, on top of that, the IDF put out some interesting footage yesterday that we're going to run through here, saying they uncovered a tunnel beneath a European hospital in Khan Yunis, where the group's leader, Mohammed Sinwar, was killed in a strike back on May 13th. Now, we still don't have Sinwar's body technically confirmed. Some Palestinian channels are putting out that he's alive and well, and there's no issue here, whereas the IDF has said that they have him, and they're doing some testing to make sure it's him. Nonetheless, those claims continue to go back and forth. But moving back to this underground, to this tunnel network here, the IDF says in a special operation carried out by the military in Shin Bet, troops reached the underground facility in recent days where they located the bodies of several terror operatives. The remains are still being identified, though the military believes that among them is the body of Sinwar. The military says the tunnel featured command and control rooms, weapons, and other intelligence materials. The IDF says the tunnel reached is directly beneath the European hospital in Khan Yunis and was built by Hamas. So let's go ahead and pull that video up here and run through it, because there's a couple different aspects that I want to talk through that are getting a lot of attention right now, understandably so. So starting here on ground level, we've got the European hospital. So they're inside of the compound of the hospital on both sides here. This looks to be some sort of exhaust vent or something. There's no access point here, right? There's no ladder. Hamas is not diving down this thing head first. That, I'm going to pause real quick. That right there has caught some pushback, where there's this jump cut from this ventilation shaft or whatever that might be, all the way to, and you blink and all of a sudden you're down underground in this tunnel network. All right, I stand corrected. Looks like Israel saw some of those complaints and just a few moments ago released this footage showing the uncut, right? We've got a drone on the outside of the hospital. There's the emergency room, straight down into the tunnel networks underneath the hospital. So there, problem solved. It's the tunnel underneath the hospital. I guess should be good enough now. But nonetheless, pretty similar to a lot of the tunnels we've seen in recent clips. Clearly, this one's been used recently. You got weapons on the wall. Don't see a lot of those in recent tunnels. A lot of the times, Hamas has moved on pretty rapidly, and there's not this degree of supplies. But nonetheless, this is the most recent footage put out by the IDF showing the tunnel network directly under the European hospital in the Gaza Strip. So the takeaway from this hospital footage, or allegedly this is coming from underneath the hospital, a lot of the tunnels that we saw in other portions of the Strip, Hamas had left long ago, and there was nothing there. So when they get into a facility and they actually start to find fans and computers and weapons left behind, uniforms, things like that, it means that Hamas has been down there relatively recently. And that is in line with what the IDF said in this case, where they identified bodies in that underground facility. Now, as the IDF continues these pushes across the Gaza Strip, they have been able to recover a handful of the bodies of hostages that were taken on October 7th. Two of those shown here was Judy Weinstein Haggai, 70 years old, and Gadi Haggai, 72 years old. These two were killed on October 7th, 2023, when the Palestinian Mujahideen organization, so Hamas-affiliated group, killed them in Israel during the course of that attack and moved their bodies back into Gaza. The Israeli Army radio network reported that the relevant intelligence here was gained via the interrogation of terrorists who were taken prisoner during military operations in Gaza. So that is something I would expect that we're going to see more and more, is intelligence-driven operations, talking to people that they just pull off the battlefield, or in that most recent video underneath the hospital, uncovering any sort of relevant intelligence materials and using those to continue operations and push into areas where Hamas, or in this case, the Palestinian Mujahideen group, is still operating. Now, a similar note that came out at the same time, but I didn't see it directly related, but you have to assume that it is the leader of this organization was killed in an IDF operation around the same time. So the IDF and ISA put out a statement saying that Asad Abu Sharia was killed this last week in Gaza City. He's the head of the Mujahideen terrorist organization. They say he was instrumental in carrying out the attack into Israel on October 7th, and in addition to killing and taking Judy and Gadi, as mentioned a moment ago, they say he was also directly involved in the abduction and murder of Shiri, Ariel, and Kfir Bibas. So again, I think it's worth reiterating every so often that it's not just Hamas operating in the Gaza Strip. There's a significant number of kind of affiliated groups. The second largest would be the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. A lot of their leaders have been killed in recent weeks and months, but there are some other organizations there as well that by and large have been operating pretty uniformly under Hamas since the war began. We've not seen a lot of diversion between those groups. Now, as the IDF is pushing throughout the Gaza Strip, we're starting to see more messages from Hamas kind of threatening them, saying, do not continue these operations or else. And the or else is suggesting that they might kill the hostages if Israel pushes any further. Just yesterday, Hamas released this graphic here saying, quote, the occupation forces are besieging a place where the Zionist prisoner Matan Zangalkar, my apologies in the pronunciation, is being held. We categorically affirm that the enemy will not be able to recover him alive. If this prisoner is killed during an attempt to free him, the occupation army will be the one responsible for his death. Now, look, no doubt, hostage rescue is an incredibly risky operation, and hostages can very easily be killed in the course of that operation. But the way that Hamas phrased this, that is just overtly saying, if you come down here, he's going to die. I mean, they just clear as day say you will not be able to recover him alive. Not, it could be challenging, not be careful, you're getting closer. And we heard that earlier in the war where as bombings were taking place, you would occasionally see Hamas put out a statement and say, hey, Israel's actually bombing really close to some of the hostages. And you kind of had to interpret that a couple different ways. Were they genuinely concerned? Because remember, the hostages are a big bargaining chip for Hamas. Or were those airstrikes hitting maybe a little too close to sensitive targets or senior leadership figures? In this case, they're not even saying, wait a minute, you're getting close. They're saying he's going to be dead if you continue pushing in this certain direction. Now, I do want to talk about the aid situation in Gaza because this has been so confusing and complex for anybody trying to keep up with it. And I understand if the nature of this reporting in recent days and weeks has caused people to just say, I'm not going to pay attention anymore. It's too hard to keep up. I get it because we're watching very well-respected journalists and news organizations get drugged over reporting something too early or too late or leaving out a word or adding a word unintentionally or intentionally. It's been chaos. But we're going to get into this here briefly, especially around the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. And something I want everybody to keep in mind when we're talking about this is we often hear about the concern of aid being weaponized. And you'll hear a lot of Israeli supporters say, why on earth would we be supporting and supplying our enemy? Who in the history of warfare provides aid to their adversary in the middle of a fight? And I think that oversimplifies things because that gives us the image in our mind that, say, an aid package goes into the Gaza Strip and it goes to Hamas fighters in a tunnel. So instead of the civilians eating or getting the medical aid, you've got these fighters down in a tunnel eating that food to stay alive, drinking that water to stay alive, and using those medical supplies to patch up their fighters. And while, yes, no doubt that has happened to a degree, a better way to view this is viewing the aid that is coming in as a form of currency. That aid can allow Hamas to influence the population however they see fit. Again, remember, in the areas of the Gaza Strip that Israel does not control, the armed faction in control there is Hamas. So there's no doubt people inside of the Gaza Strip in need of aid. There's just no way that in the middle of a war zone with the entrances controlled, if not sealed, that there are people in certain areas that have a shortage of food and have a shortage of medicine, a shortage of access to some of those things. No doubt. When it moves in there, how easy would it be for Hamas in any one of these instances, and we've seen reports of this, to simply say, only the people we want get the aid, or to get the aid you have to do this, or if we think that maybe you have been providing intelligence to the IDF about the location of hostages, your family doesn't get aid. It allows them to exert a significant amount of influence over the population. Or how about this? If you want to receive aid, you need to stay in this area, and that area might be in and around a Hamas headquarters. and they know the IDF won't move in there while there's so many civilians. Simple, right? It's not that hard to see how this aid could be utilized, weaponized as a form of warfare. So that's something to keep in mind when we get into these aid deliveries, which is the specific reason that this Gaza Humanitarian Foundation was stood up, or the stated reason, was to bypass Hamas, give it directly to the people, and do not allow Hamas any control over where, how it's distributed. Now, something as this Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is stood up, because there is a U.S. security aspect to this. This is a U.S. foundation. It's backed by the U.S. and Israeli government, and there's a U.S. security company providing security on the ground. It's not clear if those personnel are American or if they were just hired by American. Okay, so I want to make sure that's clear. But we're starting to see more and more media come out in some Palestinian channels. I'm going to highlight the one here from Gaza Now, where they said just earlier today, U.S. forces in Nezterim, central Gaza, opened fire and used pepper gas against Palestinian civilians waiting for aid, killing and wounding women and children. We are going to see an uptick, I have no doubt, in claims that American forces are the ones killing Palestinians. Because, and they're probably not wrong in this assessment, that is going to spark something in the United States more than it does in Israel. So when that news comes out, again, I think a lot of people have kind of just stopped paying attention to this because it's so confusing and hard to keep up with what's actually happening. And when they say, hey, the IDF, we'll get into this in a minute, killed civilians trying to receive aid, I don't know how much that goes over in Israel. And they've been talking about that for years now during the course of this war. But when you swap that out and say it's U.S. forces, Americans, pulling the trigger, doing the killing in Gaza, I think it's reaching a different audience, and I think it probably has more impact than we've seen in quite a while. We'll see how that plays out. And I should note that claim is unsubstantiated. There's no evidence to back that up at this point, but that's never stopped anyone from making outrageous claims or individuals from running with them, right? Now, turning to the actual back and forth is probably the best way to put it about shootings at these aid handout locations, which, full stop, if people were ever being lured anywhere to receive aid and then they're open fire on, like, that's awful. There's no scenario where that is a good thing. And that's how it's being presented in some circles, but it's not entirely clear that that's what happened. The Associated Press did a bit of a rundown here where they said, while shootings have been reported near all three distribution hubs, the heaviest occurred Sunday and Tuesday at the Flag Roundabout. The traffic circle is located on the designated route about 1 kilometer northwest of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation's distribution hub in the Tel al-Sultan district of Rafah. The hub is a few hundred meters from an Israeli army base. Witnesses said that in the early hours Sunday, as crowds made their way down the coastal road towards the hub, Israeli troops fired warning shots and made announcements through drones flying overhead, telling them to turn back and return when the hub opened at 5 a.m. By 3 a.m., thousands were massed at the roundabout waiting for the hub to open. This was when Israeli troops started firing with guns, tanks, and drones, 3 Palestinian witnesses said. They said they saw people falling dead or wounded as the crowd scattered for cover. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation said there was no violence in or around their distribution centers and that its personnel have not opened fire. So again, the GHF saying their people haven't opened fire is directly contradictory to the statement made by Gaza Now earlier, but I do think we're going to see that little shift mentioned quite a bit. The IDF denied this and said, hey, we did fire warning shots, but we never opened fire into the crowd. And they did release a video that unfortunately is a little too graphic. You know what? We'll link it in the description below if you want to check it out. A little too graphic for YouTube, but it shows what appear to be Hamas gunmen opening fire near the crowd. I'm sure somebody will say, no, those are actual IDF. They're just not uniformed. They just happen to be wearing Palestinian garb and carrying AKs outside of the security perimeter. I don't know. It looks like Hamas to me, opening fire on the people, which does kind of fit a lot of other reports right now, which is, as we just mentioned, this aid is a tool for Hamas to exert control over the population. If they lose control of that tool, it's one less thing they have, one less form of power they have in Gaza. And that does kind of line up as well with additional intelligence coming out of Israel. They released a statement, the audio, a phone call from a Palestinian this week that said, quote, the people who fired were Hamas terrorists. They don't want the people to receive aid. They want to foil the plan so the aid will go to them, allowing them to steal it. They've gone completely bankrupt. The IDF and Kogat have revealed multiple recordings in which Gazan residents tell an IDF officer about Hamas's attempts to obstruct the distribution of humanitarian aid to the residents of Gaza. They say Hamas is a brutal and murderous terrorist organization who is starving the residents of Gaza. It is doing everything in its power to sabotage the successful distribution of aid in Gaza. And as we kind of wrap up today, I think it's worth just remembering the aid distribution in Gaza is not clear-cut. It's not simple. There are parties inside of Gaza that do not want the people to receive that aid. It is their best interest if A, the aid doesn't come, or B, if it does, it only goes through Hamas channels. So just approach a lot of the reporting around the humanitarian aid situation with caution. I would urge people to take a breath when you see a crazy report come out. Give it a minute, give it a couple hours, maybe even give it a day before really coming to a determination as to what played out, because we're seeing directly contradictory reporting day in and day out, specifically around this aid situation. But that's all I got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.